Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now today, on from the promise I made in my update video, the previous one, I'm going to be starting a small series talking about this game, Mrs. Thatcher's War, the Falklands 1982. This is a very nice, very beautifully produced, I must say, Ziploc game produced by White Dog Games and designed by R. Ben Madison. It is in fact his third design in what's known as the British Wars series produced by that company. And it's a solitaire game, which I find quite attractive because it's always interesting to get into the driver's seat and see if you can tackle a wily game system. And I think it's a good choice because there's a lot of Falklands War games out there, quite a few of which are two-player. But in many respects, it's a bit of an asymmetrical scenario because the British have certain advantages which the Argentines cannot really match or replicate. But equally, there's some things that make the Argentines really tricky foes. And advantages such as geographical positioning and the distance at which the British are operating and the various shortages they operate under that make this a really, really challenging campaign for the British too. So I'm just going to have a quick look at what I've had a look through the rules, and I had a partial playthrough a while ago. I think I'm going to have to re-educate myself because it was a good while now. But I did enjoy looking at various bits of this game, and it seems to have a great deal of promise. And of course, looking at the cover, you've got all the familiar imagery of that war, including Mrs. T herself looking vaguely threatening. Don't know what she does to the enemy, but sometimes she scares me. I was intrigued by this. I'm banned in Argentina. Now you can read a lot into that. I think I'll start off by assuring everyone that whatever reason it actually was banned in Argentina, if it's banned in Argentina, this game, as far as I can determine, it's not due to the fact that it is unduly pro-British. I mean, the objection might be based on the fact that it is, if anything, quite a level treatment of the war. There is, hang on, I'll unpack everything so you can see what I'm on about. There is a fairly lengthy and detailed history of the war at the back of the 12-page rule book. I mean, this is the first thing you notice when you take it out of its bag. It's got beautifully presented rules. I'll just show you the. Come on, cooperate with me. Yes, there's the designer's notes, which, as you can see from the fine print, are actually quite extensive. And when you get to the end of it and you look at the bibliography, you see that a huge amount of work has gone into this. I mean, Mr. Madison wasn't kidding around. In fact, there's a photo of him actually at the Falklands. So he went out there to do quite a bit of his research, and he actually took the trouble to really get to know the ground, to understand the experience. I mean, it's one thing to read about the campaign, the accounts of the Falklands War from both sides are pretty harrowing, but it's another to actually get out there and get a feel for the place. So I really admire that. The rule book itself, I mean, when you take away the designer's discussion and the lovely chromy bits, like there's quotes from people who participated or observed the war, there's historical information interspersed between the rules. I mean, really, it amounts to about 10 pages of rules. But this is quite a detailed game. There's a lot of steps to it. Each turn has quite a bit to get through. But I think once you get used to what happens in a turn, you will be referring to the rule book less and less. One thought I had was that maybe it could have had more in the way of a play aid, and you'll see what I mean in a second. The other thing is the font size is really quite small in this rule book. If your eyes are like mine and I'm beginning to get that sort of old man turn as my vision begins to go a bit funny and I have to do that, rule books like this become a bit more of a chore. But that said, the rules are very logically laid out. Everything is properly explained. On my initial run through, there was nothing that was difficult to understand. It's really just, as I say, getting used to the steps of the game, and it's a bit of a memory job as well. But once you do a bit more, you will get used to it. So, what else do you get inside the folder? Very handy player aid card, which has a detailed sequence of play. You'll see what I mean about how much is packed into every single turn. There are a lot of steps, but each one is referenced. So as you begin to gain confidence with the game, as you begin to get used to it, start to figure out what you're doing, you will be referring to the rulebook less and less. There's a air combat results table there. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to do basic fractions when comparing combat factors and then roll a dice and then you get a result. There's the news headlines table. This is something I quite like. I do love Chrome in a war game, and I love it when you actually get a nod to historical events that took place. It takes a lot of skill, I think, to work up a good random events table for any game, but and on this one it's done very well. You get specific things like submarines threatening the carriers, the chance that Chile might jump in on the British side to, not overtly, but they do nasty things to make the life of the Argentines very uncomfortable. You may also find arms dealers, shady arms dealers supplying Argentina with weapons on the quiet. There's even the threat of a visit by the Pope, which is a bit of a diplomatic setback for the British because that undermines their war effort, even though the Pope was really just after peace, but it would have favoured Argentina had it happened. What else have we got in here? There's a surprising amount. This is a handy player aid chart, but also a holding box for discarded units and units that are out of play. But there we go. There's the task force engagement table. What happens every time you come under fire, and the tragic results depending on once you've applied your modifiers and you check your casualties. The lower the better for the British, the higher the worse it is for them. And for ground combat, there's the modifiers that you apply when ground forces fight each other. Now this game has two maps, and two very, very beautifully produced maps, I must say. Here is the strategic map, which is A4 sized. It's a really nice bit of work. It's not expensive. This is the kind of high quality print that you'd find in, I'd say off an office printer, but that doesn't take anything away from it. It's beautifully produced. The print is really, really clear. And this is basically the British player's strategic map. So you've got the Argentine coast there. You have got the various sectors. Now, these function for regulating the operations of the Argentine Navy as well as its air forces. Each area has its own air group assigned to it with a generic runway printed to represent its air bases. The British, of course, have the war zone itself, the Falkland Islands with the total exclusion zone, South Georgia sector, and, of course, Ascension Island. Can't do without Ascension Island. They have their own repair pool, as do the Argentines. There's the weather table, all the elements you'd expect and when you're looking at the strategic element of this campaign. So you actually get to fight this war at lots of different levels. There's the naval strategy side you need to take care of. And then there is the A3 sized map, which gives you a crack at the ground combat. So here we really get down to the nitty gritty of fighting your way from the San Carlos landing zone all the way over to Port Stanley. And as the British, time is not on your side. this of necessity was a very short campaign because of the seasonal weather, and the British had to keep to the clock. If the weather closed in before they'd successfully cleared the East Falklands, then and particularly Port Stanley, then the it could have had a major impact on the British chances of success. The Argentines might even have secured a diplomatic win just by hanging on. So the British player in this game really feels the pressure to get across that space before that turn track runs down. But it's not easy because British resources are limited. As I said earlier, you're operating at the end of a really, really long supply chain. You can't really afford any major disasters. And even in successful actions, every time you lose a frigate, or if your ground forces suffer a setback, or you suffer some casualties in the air, if some of the requisitioned merchant ships are sunk that are bringing you fresh supplies, I mean, Atlantic Conveyor comes to mind, if you want a real life example. All these things can conspire to either slow you down, or even, or almost as bad, be negatively reported in the press. Yes, there is even an element of political battling and even the nature of press coverage in the BBC that is factored into this game. And I think that's really clever because it's not just about winning battles on land, sea, and air and guarding your logistic supply lines. This lady and her government faced a lot of domestic pressure over the course of the war. And while there were many in Britain who were for liberating the Falklands, there were a significant number who really wanted nothing to do with it. And a major defeat could well have brought down the government. Maybe that's a bit hyperbolic, maybe not. There was an awful lot at stake. So you as the player are fighting on multiple fronts, your home, domestic, as well as the battlefield. And all of that's nicely encapsulated in that little package there. Now, I've gone on a lot about the components that you see in there, but what about the counters? I mean, I've got baggies full of obviously light blue for Argentina, angry red for Britain for the most part. I think they're all British in there, yep. And generic game counters. Luckily I had just the right sizes to store them sensibly. Now the counters are of pretty good quality. I mean, they won't all win beauty contests, but they are nice and solid and laser cut. And they've got that really nice scuff-resistant finish, which means that you'll be playing with these a lot and they'll look good as new. And they give a good flavour for what's represented here. So in the naval combat sphere, I hope the camera will focus, that is the generic counter 1 of 2 for the British escort ships. So these are your surface vessels, your frigates, your destroyers, ships like the Sheffield and the Antelope are part of the larger force represented by this counter. Come on, camera, focus. No, you're not going to do it. And then interestingly, when it comes to the planes, you get individual aircraft. So that is actually Ward's own Harrier. I like the touch that you do actually get named aces in this game. So that's Ward's Harrier. 7 is its combat rating. And HI simply denotes that it is part of the Invincibles air group. Of course, if you're a Harrier that hails from Hermes, you'll have an HH up there. British ground unit, the Welsh Guards. The ground units tend to be battalions or regiments, depending on size and type. And the ground combat, in a way, is the most straightforward. Each unit has a strength rating. On the Argentine side, you get counters for large formations like the air groups. So there's about half a dozen of these showing both the position, deployment, and also to a degree current strength of the Argentine air groups. Like the British, they have counters for individual fighters, in this case one of their daggers, I believe, combat rating of 6. The Argentine Air Force has a plethora of different types of planes. And if purists are wondering, oh yes, Pusaras are there. And lastly, there's ground forces, which you would encounter on once you land at San Carlos and begin your eastward advance. So whenever Argentine units appear, they are placed face down, and you never quite know when you enter an encounter what you're going to get. You flip them up. In this case, it's a patrol. Camera's still not focusing. So that would be an easy win if you had a powerful formation facing them. Of course, there are larger formations. Some of them turn out to be dummies. It keeps you guessing. And for the generic ones, I mean, I like these because they give you a flavour for some of the optional events you can have. So there is a counter for the USS Iwo Jima. Now, historically, you know, US intervention at this scale was always going to be an iffy prospect. But there is an outside chance in this game that if the British are lucky, the US will step in and let them have access to a bit more than satellite phones and intel. You can have a landing ship as well. You get to keep track to a certain degree of the Argentine stocks of Exocet rockets, which the British did historically. I'm very impressed that this is in the game because historically the British had a lot of intel that the French very kindly supplied, including the serial numbers of all the Exocets that had been supplied to Argentina. So every time a missile was expended, the British sort of ticked it off their list and kept a careful count of how many the Argentines had left. And then, of course, there's the ever-present United Nations, which for once the British don't want to see, because again, a negotiated peace prior to the liberation of the Falklands is not what the British want. So yes, keep an eye on the United Nations, because like the Pope, they can only cause you trouble as the player. So, I mean, I could go on, but I hope that's given you a quick idea of what's in this game and why I think it's not a big game. When you stuff everything back in the folder, it's basically, thin A4 size thing that you can just shove onto your bookshelf. It's wonderful, but this game packs an awful lot of punch. I mean, just by looking through the components, there's a huge amount of thought that's gone into this and a lot of work to create as detailed a simulation as possible, but without bogging you down with too much excess detail. So I'm really looking forward to giving it a bit of a partial playthrough. I don't think I could do a whole game in a sensible amount of time, but what I'll do is I'll play through a couple of turns in the next video just to give you a sense of how the game works. And if you do want a full playthrough in the future, then please do indicate, but I'll just do my usual shorter demonstration. But in the meantime, I'm very much looking forward to that. It really just remains for me to thank you all for watching this video. I really appreciate your company as always, and if you have any questions about this game or any comments you'd like to make, please do. I always look forward to your feedback, and I will try and answer you as soon as possible. Otherwise, I really look forward to seeing you all in the South Atlantic in the next video. So thank you very much for staying on for this, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye.